in, what the economy is doing, whether the state is going to generate more revenue, and they come up with a projection that that we base our budget on. So we have a balanced budget. Most states in the country have the requirement of a balanced budget, unlike the United States government, which can run a debt, and they do considerably. If you're paying any attention, they're having a big debate in Washington, D.C. right now over raising the debt limit. The debt limit now for the country is it's north of $30 trillion. The budget, the annual budget itself, is out of balance probably by maybe not a trillion, but close to that. In Delaware and most states across the country, we have to have a balanced budget. So you have to start knowing what your revenue target is going to be. So that's happens through the Delaware Economic Financial Advisory Committee. Rick Geisenberger, our Secretary of Finance, and his staff work with them. And then the governor or the cabinet secretaries develop their budgets, which we review through the fall into November and in December, and then we propose our recommended budget in January. That budget has been made public, and it's before the General Assembly right now. They've been having what are called the joint finance, meaning House and Senate finance committees, reviewing all the agency budgets and our proposal. They're having hearings as well, both on the operating budget side. The bond bill is the capital budget, so for buildings like this and other state buildings here at Dell State and other campuses, the buildings around the Green, Legislative Hall, all the courthouses in the 3 counties are examples of the capital budget. The General Assembly will review that budget. It will mark it up, and it's by law supposed to be passed by June 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year. All right, so we'll start another fiscal year in July 1, provided that we have a signed budget on June 30th. Just to give you a little bit of, I think it's complicated, but the check marks there represent the way we plan our finances, which is a process that's pretty much been followed since Pete DuPont was governor in the mid-1970s. If you remember there, not many people here old enough to remember that, but we had a real bad fiscal situation. And the governor and the legislature at the time came up with separate revenue estimates. The governor presented a budget just like we did in January that was based on estimates that his team came up with. The legislature ignored those estimates, came up with their own, passed their own budget. The governor vetoed the budget. The legislature overrode his veto of that budget, and they all figured out that was no way to run a railroad, certainly no way to run a government. And after that, Governor DuPont, Democratic and Republican leaders in the General Assembly came together and came up with a number of things to improve the process. The first was to establish the Delaware Economic and Development, the Economic, what do they call it? DFAC, thank you, the Delaware Economic and Financial Advisory Committee, which establishes those revenue estimates every year. And since then, so 50 years or more, both the General Assembly and subsequent governors have always accepted those revenue estimates, never argued about them, but always would work and argue about what came next. The other things that were done at that time was to create a rainy day fund, which is 5% of the state budget. In this case, you'll see in a minute, we have state revenues now approaching $6 billion. I want to say, I forget what the current DFAC number is. So at the beginning of the year, we set up a 5% rainy day fund. They also created limits for the legislature, which can only appropriate up to 98% of those estimated revenues. So you've got 7%, 5% in the rainy day fund, and 2% that's not appropriated to establish budget. We changed that just shortly after I was reelected, because what that enabled you to do, when you have a lot of extraordinary revenue, you could appropriate, the legislature and the governor could appropriate into 98% of that big number. So what we decided to do, because the state would always get into a fiscal problem by doing that when the revenues went the other way, the economy got softer. So we created a process where we, DFAC, establishes a budget growth, operating growth target. It's been around 4%. It's based on economic growth, population growth, inflation indicators. So, and you'll see in a minute where that means that we have a budget that's targeted at a lower rate than when you have your revenues at a very high level. In addition, any revenue that was above that target would either go to one-time capital expenses or into our budget stabilization fund, which now is at $421 million, which is a pretty big number. It's actually a little bit bigger than the 5% rainy day fund. We also allocated $664 million in cash, the bond bill. I just wanted to give you this slide. It's a little bit extra detail than we normally give, just to give you an idea of the size of the budget, $5.5 billion. The money that goes to grant and aids, those are for mostly social service and community organizations in communities across our state. And then the capital budget, the cash, and the GO bonds, that's the amount that we're going to borrow. There's a limit on our borrowing capability year to year, and you can see all that one-time cash going to capital projects. So in terms of priorities, should be the next slide. Public education, clearly one of our biggest, got one. Oh, it's working. All right, I don't have to shout as much. So this current budget and subsequent budgets, public education was our number priority, is our number one priority. And it includes, this year we're having a really challenging time, as most businesses in our state, hiring people right now. The labor market is really tight. The competition is intense. We have, in order for us, state agencies, to compete, we've had to raise salaries, and those, we've had a 3-year plan starting last year, this year, and next year, to raise salaries from the midpoint down as much as 9% at the lower end and up to 2% at the higher end. In education, our proposal includes a 9% raise for classroom teachers. Normally they would get a raise around 2 to 4, maybe 5%, depending if they were getting steps, educational steps from the various school districts. So a 9% raise is a big one for them, and the intention of it is to improve the results in competing for bringing teachers into our state as they graduate from the University of Delaware, from Delaware State University, and as they graduate from colleges in other states. We also put in $15 million for opportunity funding. Opportunity funding are resources that go to schools with low-income communities and disadvantaged students. And then we have a special initiative that we've been working on with the Wilmington Learning Collaborative, which was just approved and is getting underway. So public education, clearly one of our big priorities in the budget. We've also, as I just said, are investing in our state employees, increasing wages over the last 3 years in a significant way. Again, we have now about 2,000 or thereabout vacant positions in state government, positions that we can't fill, in part because we're not paying people enough to compete with other businesses in the community. We have made a target to be in compliance with the $15 minimum wage for our merit and full-time state employees, and this budget does accomplish that objective. You may remember that legislation passed 2 years ago. Where's Bill Bush? 2 years ago, 3 years ago, to increase the minimum wage over a couple of years to $15 a minimum wage. If you go out and you go to a Wawa store or most places out there, everybody's already paying $15 a wage because in order to compete for people to work for their businesses. And then we have fund with certain employee groups, they negotiate for their wages, and so we fund their wages and step increases. Early childhood education is a big priority for us, and in this budget we have a significant investment to add to the investment the state is already making for early childhood education. It is a priority for us to develop a better system for early education. The system that we have now is built on one for workforce support, and we need to have a greater focus on the educational side of that for the younger children, preschool children. It also, our current program also supports children in school up to age 12. And so if we want to make investments specifically in preschool children, we have to find a little bit better way to do that. So an investment here overall in early childhood education and a commitment to work. We're working with Senator Evans Gay in the House and others, our Lieutenant Governor, to develop a better method for providing a quality education experience for preschool children. We're also making significant, did I lose you? No, still got you. We're also making significant investment in natural areas in our state, visitation to our state parks. I see Sean Garvin here, our Director of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, I think hit the highest level ever during the pandemic, not surprisingly. And so we've been, we've really got some wonderful outside natural areas up and down the state and making some investments in shoreline and waterway resiliency. We've got a very strong program in open space and farmland protection. Where's Michael Skuse is back there. We have one of the better farmland protection programs in the country. And I think the most acres per capita preserved than any other state. Did I get that right? Which is a really good thing. Most of that money obviously is spent here in Kent County and Sussex County and rural areas, keeping those lands in farmland production, agricultural production. Next slide. So we also make investments in our economy. We have what we refer to as the strategic fund. It enables us to invest in companies that are looking at moving to Delaware, companies that are looking at expanding in our state. One of our biggest priorities is to keep Delaware's economy growing, because when you have a strong and growing economy, you have the jobs necessary for people to support themselves and their family. Obviously, with the current labor market being what it is, that competition really revolves around our ability to demonstrate that we have the workforce here for companies to come here and set up businesses, and for the companies that are already here to expand. We've had some real success, notwithstanding the pandemic, over the last couple years. When I first became governor, we established the Delaware Prosperity Partnership, which is a public-private partnership to drive economic development in our state. And they've done a really good job at bringing in and attracting really mostly smaller businesses that bring 50 to 100 employees. We don't focus as much as that big home run with 1,000 or 2 employees. Every now and then we're fortunate, and we have a company like Wuxi Pharmaceuticals that decided to establish a location outside Middletown, $500 million capital investment. They're going to hire 500 people when they get that building put together, and then another 500 down the road. So we're excited about that. More than ever, economic development in our state is in the kind of the technology, science and technology sector. That's why our investments here at Delaware State, at the University of Delaware, at Delaware Tech, are probably more important than they ever have been. You may remember the Chrysler plant that was at that just off the University of Delaware campus. It closed around 2008, I want to say, maybe 2006, and was subsequently a couple years later purchased by the University of Delaware. and they've been developing, we've been working with them to develop that campus. Now there are more people that are working at the Star campus, which is what the University of Delaware calls it, than at the Chrysler plant when it was at full operation. Very different kinds of jobs, which creates a priority for educational preparation for a workforce to be able to take these more science and tech-based jobs. We do have a manufacturing-like operation down there, Bloom Energy, which is expanding its employment there. I think they're up to about 800 employees there, which is a big shot in the arm. So here are some of the tools that we use. Our strategic fund, $25 million in the budget. Site readiness fund, $10 million. We have a lot of sites that aren't quite there, and so when we have a business that's looking to expand or to move into our state, and we have a site but it doesn't maybe have the infrastructure necessary, we have a process where they can access that $10 million. Actually, Representative Bush has been very helpful in promoting the concept of having somebody that helps businesses interact with local government so that we can move that process along and get folks to a ribbon cutting as soon as possible. And then similar kind of investment here, the Transportation Investment Infrastructure Fund, again, more like the Site Readiness Fund to make a site ready if we have a client that wants to move to Delaware. Housing is a big priority. You probably read about this in the paper. This is the largest investment that we've ever had in housing in the state's history. A lot of that money, most of that money, is money that's coming from the federal government. You can see the funds that those monies are going into. Some of it is to support people to either buy or rent existing facilities. A lot of it is to, like the Catalyst Fund, is to create incentives for private developers to develop new units. The simple fact of the matter is we don't have enough affordable units for people that need them and for workers. Well, a good example of this disconnect is in Sussex County, where you have a lot of kind of lower wage jobs along the beach area. All the folks that work in those jobs can't afford housing in that area. And so you need to develop housing both in that area and in central and western Sussex County and other places. So the workforce that you need for that part of the economy, those folks have a place to live. So a big investment in housing. During the pandemic, we did experience a real crisis there, as a lot of people weren't able to keep going to work, and so we had to support those mostly, again, with federal funding. Next slide. So I talked a little bit, or referred to our federal resources over the last several years, and the next couple slides will show you some of the big buckets where we're investing those funds in Delaware. These are funds that came from the American Rescue Plan, which is legislation passed in the Congress, and you can see where the investments are, many of the investments that we're making. $342 million in technology, broadband. We had started already an initiative to bring broadband to rural areas, particularly here in Kent County, western Kent County, and Sussex County, particularly Sussex County. We're making some progress there. Jason Clark is here, who leads our technology department, and we are investing state money in that and using and leveraging some of the federal monies. We've not been able to use as much of the federal monies as we thought, because we kind of got ahead of the curve there a little bit, and it hurt us, but we're making investments there. We're also making investments in large enterprise-wide technology projects to support state agencies and state government. Housing development, emergency housing, I mentioned that. We did spend quite a bit of resources during the pandemic to support our healthcare and housing, our hospitals and healthcare facilities. Long-term care facilities were areas that were really dramatically hit and still struggle to this day. They, like other employers, are experiencing a real challenge bringing in CNAs and folks to work in those establishments and we've provided some resources to help them out there. $72 million of a total, $112 million to, again, a lot of nonprofits. We're waiting, as you can see from that asterisk there, approval for the rest of that money. Our library money is the big part of that, $40 million, I want to say, is going to libraries in communities across our state. $105 million of the American Rescue Plan went to higher ed, University of Delaware. $41 million for one of their big chemical engineering labs. That's about a $120, $130 million project. Delaware State University, several projects here on campus, and then Delaware Tech. We did direct considerable resources to response and mitigation for COVID, for testing, vaccinations, that kind of support. I mentioned workforce development, investment in getting folks trained up for the job openings that are available, and I mentioned a minute ago the $40 million in Delaware libraries. The bipartisan infrastructure bill passed by Democrats and Republicans in Washington, D.C., significant resources. Secretary Majeski is here, lots of additional money coming to the Department of Transportation, basically $500 million for roads and bridges, plussing up those. Lots of resources for drinking water and wastewater. Most of that money flows to central Delaware and lower Delaware. I mentioned client resilience, clean energy and electric vehicle infrastructure. One of our big initiatives through both the Department of Transportation and Natural Resource and Environmental Control is start to develop an electric vehicle infrastructure. More people will be purchasing electric vehicles. We don't yet have the kind of recharging infrastructure needed to support that, and so this is going to be a process long after my term as your governor that we're getting kick-started with some of these resources. In fact, John, I think you had a town hall meeting last night to talk about it last night? Public hearing last night to get feedback on the regulations around electric vehicles, and we'll continue to move that forward. Some resources into ports and waterways, public transit, and highway safety initiatives. I don't know how much driving you do on Route 1, but it's a speedway out there. You know, it feels like Dover down some days, and so somehow we've got to slow people down. We've just had a terrible time the last couple of years with fatalities on our roadways up and down Delaware. So just in terms of some of the investments here in the Dover area, significant investments not represented here on this slide in housing. There is a fairly significant homeless challenge here in Dover area, and some resources have gone in to help with that issue. I think that should be the last slide. Oh, investing in Delaware State. I mentioned that earlier with respect to the ARPA funding. Significant investments in this campus really over the last 20 years. It's a campus that doesn't resemble anything like what it was 20 years ago. So that should probably be the last slide. I want to thank you all for coming again, and certainly be happy to ask any questions that you might have. I told you that I was going to give you the microphone for the first question. Would you like to take that opportunity?
You mentioned waterways too. You mentioned waterways and natural heritage, and you mentioned for $7.5 million, and you mentioned it here for $52 million under infrastructure. So
yeah, those are the same kinds of funds, right? Some of it is coming from the federal ARPA money, and some of it is coming from state resources. You know, some of the types of projects, a lot of dredging projects, a lot of beach replenishment projects. Beach replenishment are not just for tourists, but also for coastal resiliency. You know, one of the issues that we have, going back to the issue of climate change and rising sea levels, is that we're one of the lowest lying, if not the lowest lying state. So we have some big issues on mostly the Delaware Bay areas. If you go to Prime Hook Wildlife Refuge, you will see what that sea rise has done to their dunes there over the last, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, would you say, Sean? It's dramatically different than what it was. And so investments in that coastline.
I thought there was, a while ago, plantings at the dunes to keep them.
Yeah, they do a lot of that, yep, and to try to stabilize them. What happens in Prime Hook in particular, and other places, is you have a big nor'easter or a hurricane that sweeps through, and it just takes all those dunes out, whether you have those grasses in there or not. And a storm, probably half dozen years, I was in the Congress, I'm not remembering exactly what year it was, came through there and blew out all the dunes there at Prime Hook.
All right, Governor, we have another question over here.
Yep.
Hello, my name's William Young. I'm from Smyrna, Delaware, and retired state employee for 35 years. I was active in reserve military for 28 years. And just for a trifecta, I graduated from Delaware State College 49 years ago.
Oh man, that's something.
So the reason I want to ask you tonight is, how will you preserve Medifil for current state of Delaware retirees?
So well, first of all, the current contract has been extended for another year and a half, I guess, right? Just to step back and kind of look at the picture generally. Number one is that cost increases in healthcare across the board for active duty state employees and for retirees are going up at a rate 2 or 3 times the rate of inflation, the growth in the economy. So we have to find ways, not just for state employees, but for the economy more generally, for other businesses, to somehow flatten out that growth rate. Part of it is a function that we're an aging population, right? I'm 66, be 67 in another month, and I'm utilizing more healthcare than I ever did before. And so some of that increase is going to come by virtue of the fact that we're aging. A lot, other parts of it is because our system is not as efficient as it could be. So the question gets to be, how do you create efficiency and provide the kind of health care that retirees like yourself, with the way that you've just described you've served, deserve? And that's what we're trying to do. The idea with the Medicare Advantage program that has now kind of been put on hold or been put on the back burner for the time being, we developed a program with Highmark that we felt addressed all the issues and problems that you hear about Medicare Advantage across the country. When this issue came up, I started calling my colleagues, governors in other states, just to ask them what kind of mix they had with respect to traditional Medicare and Medicare Advantage. And it was kind of all over the map. Some states, all Medicare Advantage. And so what we're looking for is an approach that more efficiently uses those resources, which are expanding exponentially. And we, state budget, go back to can you take us back to the solution page, just the big numbers? The numbers that are driving the state budget the most, so if we don't have our slide with the graphs in it, I noticed. You took that out. It's my favorite slide. In this case, it would have shown normal budget growth, and I could illustrate for you better what healthcare budget growth looks like. And what is healthcare for the state? It's probably $2 billion out of the 6. Does anybody, Rick, do you have that? It's certainly north of $1.5 billion. So it's Medicaid. It's not Medicare. Medicare is federal. It's the gap for retirees between what Medicare covers and the rest.
80% of the retirees' medical costs is paid by Medicare.
Correct. That's correct. So I'm getting. So we're really focused on that 20%, right? And trying to get the growth of that to be somewhere in line with the growth in the economy. It's going to be a little bit bigger just because healthcare costs are going up like that. So that's the objective. So now I want to say $150 million a year. Secretary DeMatteis is shaking her head and growing at a higher rate. So that's the bigger picture. I talked to our friend up here in the front about the same issue at a very personal level, how it affects her. The challenge for us is to explain, everybody has a right to understand how it's going to affect them individually, right? Yourself, other retirees. And that's the challenge for us, is how do we explain what we're trying to accomplish in a way where we can reach all the different arrangements that retirees have. One of which was, she has a friend that's moved to Arizona. What do you do about somebody like that, and where they might get the physicians and others who treat them? So that's the objective. And we're going to keep working on it and working on it and working on it and get to the point where where folks have the confidence with the approach that we're taking is going to preserve what they've earned, what they deserve, and that also helps us. My view is if we can manage that number, then it'll be easier to put money in the pension check that you get. You get it periodically. We did a nice one last year, thanks to Senator Trey Pardee and others who I saw Trey came in. Trey was instrumental in paying for that whole increase in 1 year because we had a lot of extra resources last year to do that. So to your fundamental point, I think, and your concern about the change, we're cognizant of that and trying to work through it. There's a committee actually that's been set up to look at the various options and to explain the situation that we're in, to try to get to a good place with folks, and we'll continue to do that.
Actually, I'm Carlotta Klein from Townsend, and I'm also a retiree teacher. As I understand it for the budget, that you budgeted the salaries, but you never budgeted the Medicare, and so that was always money that was, or Medicaid, the extra part. So that was Medifil, I guess. You always then had to find money for it. And as we've expanded in numbers, then now you're finding that you're in trouble. Is that correct, number one?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. We're finding that it's a big number. Well, let's compare it to the pension checks that you get, right? So every year, state employees pay a portion of their salary into the pension fund. The state pays into the pension fund. We invest those resources to cover the liabilities, the future liabilities of retirees. We have funded those liabilities up to almost 90%, in the 80s somewhere, right, Rick? It's one of the best funded pension programs in the country, state pension programs in the country. So year to year, we pay that additional increment of liability, not the full amount. On the healthcare side, we have very little invested in that liability. And in fact, the part of what has driven us to this is the accounting people 10 years ago required states and other entities to show their unfunded liability for retiree health and other retiree obligations. So every year, we estimate what all the retirees are going to spend on health care, and we put that in the budget, the full amount, which is now around $150 million. Not a percentage of it that would go to cover the liability like we do with the pension plan. So on the pension side, we're in good shape, really good shape. On the healthcare side, we're getting better. It's not on this slide. Can you go back to the wheel slide? We put money, if we have resources over the operating budget target, that money can either go in, okay, here we go. I used to be able to jump up. What do you think? No, Sean, what do you think, huh? Bets? Bets, come on. Oh! I have an artificial hip, too. No, that's too fancy for me. So we have a budget growth target that's based on an estimate, a formula that DFAC develops. These are nonpartisan, these are academics, these are business folks. They came up with a number. This year it was 6%, I want to say, 6.1, Rick. He's raising his. So if we have revenue above that amount, and we did this year, then we can put it into, we want to put it into one-time things. Almost 20 million of it was added to the Budget Stabilization Fund. That's a fund that we can go to, like when I first became governor, we had a $350 million deficit, and we had to cut. We cut half of that, so, 175 million or so. Now we have a budget stabilization fund in addition to the rainy day fund that we can go to when the economy goes in the tank, which it's slipping that way right now as we speak, even though the labor market is really strong. We also have an amount that we take, what is it, Rick, 1%? That goes into what's called OPED. Now this is really kind of complicated, but it's basically pre-funding healthcare, retiree healthcare. We only have a small number in it. What, about 50 million? It's $51 million in this year's budget into pre-funding our retiree health, which then, once you get it funded at a higher level, then it gets way easier to carry it year to year, much like is the case with our actual pension fund, so the pension checks that you get. All right, I know I can't jump down. All right, we got one more because I have a gentleman here. Oh, wait a minute, he's going to go first. Can he go first? Okay.
What is the rationale behind cutting the school building maintenance budget?
We didn't, did we? No. In fact, we've been adding money to what's called minor capital, well, two things. We've been funding school capital projects at an extremely high level. I don't have that slide for you, I wish I did. And we've been adding money to what are called minor capital improvements. So not capital that will last 20 years, but things like roofs and different things that you have to do. So yeah, we're not, Mark, you don't know the number on that. I know it's and Saran, do our budget people know what that minor capital improvement number is? No, I don't think so. We can get that number for you. Yes. Yeah, so that's another big thing that's hitting us right now is supply chain and inflation costs for some of these capital projects. So we've had to put significantly more, I want to say 25 million or more in this budget just for projects that have come in over budget. We just had a big highway project, Nicole was here, that we had to rebid. How much over the original estimate was that? 40%, and it's a $260 million project. That's a big number. So the good news is that people are getting paid to do that work, right? And that we have a lot of extra cash that the economy has generated as we came out of the shutdown during COVID. We kind of had a supercharged economy at that time. We get a lot of our revenue from what's called corporate franchise taxes. So the taxes companies pay to incorporate here in Delaware. And that number went through the roof. And it's a big number to start with. It's $1 billion, right, Rick? What is it? Oh, $2 billion. So whenever you hear anybody talk about Delaware being the place to be incorporated, that $2 billion enables us not to have a sales tax. If we didn't have $2 billion in corporate franchise taxes, we'd have a much higher income tax or a sales tax. All right, you were next, right?
Back to the Advantage plan. It seems to me that if you're paying a company to do the business that was always done, they have to have infrastructure, they have to have electricity, they have to have paying employees. So they're making money on us, and so they decrease what they're paying. They have decreased. If you look at, have you looked at the plans? Do you know much about the plan of what they've offered the employees?
What plans?
Their Advantage plan, the Advantage people.
No.
Well, if you, I can send you something.
Okay.
Because they have, I think we had like 4 pages of what they would pay just for prescriptions, and now they're down to 2. That's a percentage. I'm just talking, you know, that sort of thing. And
So like a schedule of things they'll pay and they won't pay.
yes, well, it's reduced everything for us. I mean,
So that's Claire DeMatteis. She's the Secretary of Human Resources, whose office is coordinating all this. And she said that the prescription drug plan doesn't change from what it is today to Medicare Advantage. Yeah, we can, you know, we have some folks to talk to about. I mean, that's one of the challenges, right? It's complicated. And everybody's situation is different, right? My mother's 92. She wasn't a teacher for the state. She taught at a Catholic school. My father worked as a teacher for the state and an educator for the state, you know, his whole career. So she still has health care through his coverage. And it's very different, I assure you, I mean, her needs, than other retirees. So the challenge for us is to communicate to as many people as we can what the difference would be, and that's proven to be difficult.
well, the co-pays are different. Are the co-pays different?
Okay, co-pays are not different. The issue that most people focus on is, somebody said it, pre-approvals, right? So who's in these networks? We had this question. And that's where we've spent the most time assuring people that we will have the networks so that they can have the physicians that they have now and that they'll need in the future. And that's been hard to do.
Yeah, but that's pre-approvals is one thing. I have a friend who has pre-approvals, and what he has to do is, because he needs surgery, he needed surgery, he had to spend over 9 months trying chiropractic, trying this, trying that. If they just sent him and had his operation, which he had both times, he wouldn't have had to suffer for 9 months. And we watched him suffer because they just kept trying the cheapest way in, when it was obviously the insurance. The insurance just needed to be paid for the operation immediately.
Well, the simple matter is yeah, well, it happens in healthcare across the board, even in the current system. It's not a perfect science, as we all know. I don't want to use my mother's example, but I have several examples of her and with the current system, and that's because diagnoses aren't always accurate. It's, you know, this could be a better way than that. The question really is, what's the most efficient and most effective way to do it? And that's what we're trying to accomplish. Can I go down here? I didn't think you were.
Well, I've already talked to the governor about my personal issues that would affect. But I also worry, like you said, the pre-approvals. We had a system at one point where I had to get pre-approvals. And it's the same thing. You know, it took months in appeals. My doctor had to write like six letters to Blue Cross Blue Shield before they finally approved it. But why have to have a 3 months or 9 months delay? And I've read that Medicare Advantage programs are notorious for not approving people. And
that's part of the problem, right? Because it's got that reputation. We've developed a program that's not like it's like in some ways, but we've developed it to be specifically relevant to our state.
That's the
provider.
question, then. What is the difference? What are you doing that's making this special for Delaware that's not like the other Medicare
Well, I
Advantage?
think recognizing existing networks, Claire, did you want to answer that question?
Zero copays, zero out-of-network costs. We can show you side by side that that is how it mirrors the Medic-Fill plan. There is a 92% first-time approval rate for prior approvals. The Highmark Medicare team, and it's all doctors or nurses that do this prior authorization, they approve the request of prior authorization 92% on the first submission. On an appeal, they approve an additional 1% on the second try to get it approved. So you're looking at somewhere 7% of procedures that are in question that take an extra level of review. So when you hear, I'm not going to get my procedure approved, 92% on the first try are approved. That's an A in any category for a prior teacher. The other issue that's different that we're still working on, as the governor said, is the network. Right now, the Medicare Advantage plan that Highmark built for the Delaware State retirees and pensioners is 95% of the Medic-Fill coverage. 95% of the doctors, of the chiropractors, of the hospitals that are in Medic-Fill are in Medicare Advantage plan. They're working on closing that 5% that aren't in it currently.
But why have a pre-approval anyway if you're at the doctor and the doctor says you need a chest x-ray and you can leave that doctor's office and walk across the street
Sure.
and have it done, which I had done this fall.
Sure.
Why would I have to wait 3 weeks or longer for an
To be
approval?
clear, very good question. To be clear, prior authorization is only for non-emergency procedures.
Well, these were non-emergency procedures.
So then when you had to do that, you're telling, if you were a pre-65 retiree, or like any of us who are active employees, we all have prior authorizations. So are you talking about a situation before you were on Medicare where you had?
No, this is recently. I'm on Medicare and the supplement, the Medifill, and I was having a breathing problem. So I went to the doctor and they said, we're sending you for an x-ray. You can go right across the street right now and get your x-ray or your MRI.
Right. Well,
And I did that.
Well, sure. So you have Medic-Fill right now. So then that is, and this is what I'm trying to get across in some of these town halls, it's Medicare itself that are requiring some of these prior authorizations. You don't, it's not just like Medicare Advantage didn't start with prior authorizations. CMS, who administers Medicare, they are requiring these prior authorization. It is the trend that Medicare is taking. I don't know if it's going to be 6 months or a year or 2 years, but when we go out to bid for a Medicare supplement plan, there is a very good likelihood, like you, Medicare, CMS, is going to require prior authorizations, whether you're in a Medicare supplement plan or whether you're in a Medicare Advantage plan.
Let's talk about her specific individual situation, unless you want to. Okay? Okay. I just don't want to have everybody in the room.
This
Yes,
might
sir.
be putting the cart before the horse, but we know it's coming, and I know you didn't really approve of it, but it's fact now, is the legal marijuana, retail marijuana sales. So you're going to have a tax revenue stream from that. So that, that maybe we could prepay some of this medical health liability with that.
Well,
It's not supposed to be comic, but,
yeah, no, I was not a supporter of that, and I'm not sure it's a good thing for our state. We have people in the room who don't agree with me. It's not an argument that I won. It's an argument that I lost, but we'll see. We'll see what kind of effect it has on our state. There are things that we haven't sorted out. I don't know that we need to have another marijuana town hall meeting here tonight, but yeah, there will be some revenue attached to it. which is part of the reason I thought it was a bad idea, frankly. If people are incentivized to make a profit on something, they're going to go hard to make a profit. The way to make a profit on it is to sell more of it. The way to sell more of it is to get people to smoke more of it. And I spent 8 years as lieutenant governor trying to get people to stop smoking cigarettes. And I was really pleased to hear on the radio this morning that the rate of folks smoking cigarettes is at its lowest level in our state, as it should be, because it can kill you. Anyway, yes, you were next.
You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it, don't fool with it. But so if we have a great state plan, as you said, from all other states in the whole nation, why in the world would you change it?
Because it's not controlling the costs like we need to do. It's that, and it's very inefficient, and it's not the way healthcare is delivered to the vast majority of people in our country and our state.
We don't care about the country, we care about us in this state. We pay.
Can you say that louder?
Yes, we don't care about the other people. It's our state. We elected you. You are to take care of us, not them.
My job is to take care of every Delawarean,
Yes. So
which includes everybody in this room.
you listen to anybody else.
Huh?
You have all the other states. Why wouldn't you just give us the best? We have
That's what we're trying to do.
Everybody anybody I talk to who is not a Delaware employee envies us.
I'm sure, because they don't pay they pay a lot.
Yes, they do.
And if you're a state retiree, you pay very, very little.
And don't you think teachers deserve it? And anybody working in the school system, the policemen deserve it?
I think teachers and law enforcement officers deserve everything that they get and more, frankly. All right, where are we? Okay.
What about what we hear that there's a lot of fraud in Medicare Advantage from the companies, the private companies now that are managing it?
Yeah, I've heard that. I mean, there was a big article in the New York Times, about a year ago? I don't know enough about it. I just know that the problem for us is it gives the program a very bad name, and it's become a political thing. I spent 6 years in Congress. It was a big political thing there. But, you know, the Congress, they can't get anything under control. I mean, $37 trillion debt that they're raising, and our budget's out of whack. I mean, and it's all about health care, you know. I remember probably 10 years ago now, maybe not that long ago, but we were having a presentation by somebody on the federal budget. I was in the Congress at the time. And what the presenter said was, no, they had an orientation for new members of Congress over in Annapolis. And the presenter was talking about the federal budget deficit and the national debt. And he said at the rate that we're going, with healthcare costs increasing, in healthcare at the federal level is Medicare, the bulk of it, 80%, and Medicaid, which includes long-term care for seniors that don't have resources. And that's a huge number. All those numbers getting bigger exponentially because the population is aging. And he made an off-the-cuff comment at the end that struck me, which he said, at this rate, the United States government will be a healthcare company with an army, a small army, meaning that the only thing that was growing was defense spending and healthcare. And that's a reality. We're talking about the vast majority of the resources is coming on Medicare is coming from the federal side at 80%. And on a Medicaid side, it's basically half. So for us, it's total healthcare spending is over $2 billion at a $6 billion budget and growing at a rate faster than our revenue growth. You don't have to be able to do math real well to figure out that those lines are going to separate at some point, which is kind of where we are. So our goal, going back to the goal, which is to provide you with the best health care that you have, admittedly. Everybody has said that. We don't care about the others, true, in some sense. I care about all the other Delawareans, right? But we have to find a way to do that in a way that meets our obligations to you for the work that you've done for the state and addresses the budget side of it as well. Hard thing to do. Okay, where are we? Other questions, comments? What? Oh. All right, I guess we're done. Thank you all for coming. My guess is we'll have more conversations like this over the next year or so, and we'll make every effort to get out there and explain to as many people individually, and we'll talk to you your individual situation and others if you like, to provide a comfort level that you need to move forward. So thank you all for coming.